Perfect. Well, hello, friends. Welcome to Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast. My name is Kyra Droog, and I am incredibly honored and really excited to have you here along for what promises to be a journey of adventure and excitement and curiosity and, dare I say it, mystery. I have goosebumps, my friends. Literal goosebumps. What an incredible theme to get us started with. And I want to give a massive shout out to the incredibly talented Jeff Lee, who brought this podcast theme to life. I wanted to kind of get us started with some introductions to me, to the podcast, to the Hardy Boys, to the different strings that gather us here in this really unique and powerful exploration of time and culture and history and all of the different aspects of our lives that the Hardy Boys have inevitably had some connection to or impact in. And let me tell you, my friends, it's really difficult for me to think of a part of our society that the Hardy Boys hasn't impacted in some way, shape, or form. And believe me, we're going to dive into all of them. So, my friends, let's start us off with the person whose voice you're going to listen to probably the most across this podcast series. And that's me. Hello. As I said, my name is Kyra Droog. I will be your host of Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast. The way I like to introduce myself is I am not your average reader of Hardy Boys books. If you're working under the assumption, like most publishers are, that the books are being read by 8 to 12-year-old boys. I discovered my love for the Hardy Boys really early on in my life. I was gifted Nancy Drew books as a girl is, and my brother was gifted Hardy Boys books as a boy is. And over the course of our childhood, those Hardy Boys books mysteriously disappeared off of his bookshelf and mysteriously reappeared on my bookshelf. And eventually they just kind of became mine. I think we talked about it as adults. It's totally fine. Anyway, I am many things outside of my love for the Hardy Boys. I'm a reader, a writer, a publishing professional, a fitness instructor, which you'll hear in my voice sometimes. I'm a grant writer, a project manager, a newly minted podcaster, and most importantly, because it is always most important, I am mom to my slightly geriatric and very toothless kitty named Nova. My academic background is in communication studies. I have a Master of Publishing, and if my academic career taught me anything, it's that I have this inextinguishable curiosity about the world around us. And I guess the thing under my magnifying glass, if I may, for a really, really long time now has been the Hardy Boys. Now, for anyone who hasn't really come across the Hardy Boys before, or is like, oh yeah, it's that book series that's got blue covers that I remember from my childhood. Perfect. Amazing. You already know more about the Hardy Boys than you need to. There is no need for you to bring any previous Hardy Boys knowledge or context to this space. This is a space for us to explore and learn together. And as part of that, let's get started with a little bit of Hardy Boys history for us all. So the Hardy Boys began in the late 1920s as a book series for boys. It was packaged and prepared by the Stratemeyer Syndicate out of New Jersey. And the very first books, this is so fun. This is my Canadian claim to fame. The very first books, as we will discuss, were written by Canadian author Leslie McFarlane. And these books started off as, a new way for kids to entertain themselves, kids to enjoy reading, kids to find, that energy and excitement in a book. And over the last, as of this recording, 99 years, the Hardy Boys have become so much more than that. They are, oh my goodness, they have been everywhere. They are in print, they are in TV, they are in video games, they are in music, there's graphic novels. The Hardy Boys have had so many different impacts on different parts of, I guess, like cultural media, but they've also played a really important part in publishing and questions about gatekeeping and censorship. Because yes, the Hardy Boys books were banned in the 1950s. Don't worry, I promise we're going to talk about this. Now, before we talk about this too much further, I think it's important to introduce you to some of the folks that we are going to talk about. And those, my friends, are the members of the Hardy family. I know I said that you don't need any context coming into this space, and I stand by that. There's no context that is required. I just want to take a second to provide a little refresher, an introduction or reintroduction to Frank and Joe and their immediate family so that, we have that behind us as we jump into this really exciting podcast series. And so, my friends, I would like to introduce or reintroduce you to our main characters, Frank and Joe Hardy. Frank and Joe are brothers. They are detectives. They live in Bayport, USA, which, you'll hear me say this again and again, we'll talk about it. Because Bayport, USA is not only not actually a place, but it may also be the least safe place in the world if you consider the number of crimes that have occurred there. As you can tell, I have thoughts. But back to the introductions, my friends. We'll start with Frank Hardy. Frank is the older sibling. Usually, if you're a person that likes to picture characters in your mind, Frank is taller, shorter, dark hair, dark eyes. He's usually the brains of the operation. He's the one that takes a second to be like, let's think this through before jumping into action. Then there's Joe Hardy, Frank's blonde-haired, blue-eyed sibling who is a year younger than he is. Their ages differ in the different series. We'll talk about that. Joe is athletic and impulsive and absolutely and fundamentally a act first and hope you can talk your way out of it later. He is a shit disturber in like all of the best ways. I mean, they're both shit disturbers in the best ways, but like, I don't know. I appreciate them. And I appreciate the way that they balance each other out in a lot of ways. Now, Frank and Joe didn't just like randomly wake up one morning and decide they wanted to be detectives. They take after their father, Fenton Hardy, who is a former NYPD detective turned incredibly successful private detective. Now, we'll explore this throughout the podcast series because I'm really hoping to find someone that can convince me that Fenton Hardy is actually an incredibly successful private detective, because I'm not really convinced that he's all that good. And I feel like that is because a significant amount of Hardy Boys books revolve around Frank and Joe either solving their father's cases, rescuing their father after he's been kidnapped or otherwise incapacitated while attempting to solve said cases, or all of the above. And let's be real, in lots of cases, it is in fact all of the above. Fenton is married to Laura Hardy, who, depending on the book series or the TV series, is a librarian, is a journalist, is dead, is never mentioned, or is a character whose, I swear, literally her only job is to like exist as the doting and concerned motherly figure and remind them to be home on time and get worried when they come home covered in dirt because they've been fighting, and, you know, pack them wholesome lunches before they go out on adventures. Let's also remember that this series started in 1930s. And what else do we expect from a mother in a 1930s book for boys? The other character that I will give an honorary mention to, because she is quite possibly my favorite, and yeah, I know that's a really high bar to be setting this early on, is Aunt Gertrude. And Aunt Gertrude is Fenton's sister, and she is the sassiest, spiciest old lady you will ever meet. She will whack someone with a cane. She will very pointedly tell a man off for breathing too loudly in her general direction. And at one point in one of my favorite books, she spends not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 pages doing nothing but yelling at Frank because she doesn't think he drives well enough. And she had the audacity to lean on the horn, and it scared her. But of course, it was his fault. Aunt Gertrude, my friends. Aunt Gertrude is just something else entirely. And we are so grateful for her. Now that we've had the chance to introduce or reintroduce ourselves to these characters, I want to take a second and make sure that we really understand the way that we're going to have these conversations. How the Hardy Boys as characters, as a series, as a cultural institution are going to lead us through our exploration of different aspects of the world around us. And I think the best way to do that is to give you a little teaser of some of the really exciting content and conversations that are upcoming on this podcast. And I know you can't see it, but I have the biggest grin on my face right now because I am so incredibly excited to introduce you to the amazing, wonderful folks that I've had the opportunity to connect with. So we're going to talk about a number of different things, and I want to give you just like a little bit of a highlight reel of things that we can expect to come. We're going to have conversations about the Hardy Boys in libraries and what happens in library spaces and why library spaces are so absolutely and fundamentally radical in today's society. And we're going to talk about what it looks like to connect a reader to a Hardy Boys book and why a librarian or a library assistant might choose a Hardy Boys book as, the right fit for a reader of a certain type. We're also going to talk about what it looks like when books aren't available. So we talked about the Hardy Boys being banned books. What does that look like in a public sense? How do books come off of public library shelves? And what is the process behind the scenes of how that is built? We're going to take some conversations that typically only happen in high-level academia, and we are going to break them down in a sense that really focuses on the why. Why is it important? Why does it matter outside of academia to be having these conversations? We're going to talk about why pop culture studies are important, why a project like this matters to, everyday folks that are going on with their lives, why it matters if a work is classified as Canadian, if it's considered Canadian, if the author is Canadian, what it means for a work to be Canadian. We're going to have some really fun Canadian conversations. We are also going to explore in great depth book banning. We're going to look at who makes those rules? What does it look like for a book to be banned? And I know we just talked about what that's going to look like in a public library sense, but we're also going to talk about it in a larger, more overarching sense. Book banning is a thing that is happening across our world, and it's really important for folks to understand what it means for a book to be banned in a practical sense of, okay, this book is no longer available in these specific situations, but also in, I guess, a more, like a larger context of, okay, but who's making the decisions about why these books aren't available? And what does that tie back to in terms of who's making decisions about what is and isn't acceptable for kids of different ages and interests to read? We're going to have so many conversations about the Hardy Boys in film. We're going to talk to folks that have been involved in bringing the Hardy Boys to life on the TV screen as actors, as directors, as folks that are involved in the writer's room in terms of how music is decided. And that's going to give us a really fascinating way to look into film and the film industry. And I mean, there's so many of us. I hesitate to say all of us, but very likely most of us are taking in some kind of scripted television content in some way, shape, or form, and looking into, behind the scenes, what it looks like to bring those to life, especially for folks that are bringing these beloved, almost 100-year-old characters to life in a way that suits modern audiences. And I mean, both within film and outside of film, we're going to look at audiences and what it means for a book series to be detective fiction and what that looks like in adults versus in books intended for kids. And we're also going to look at publishing in a greater sense, because little do most people know, the Hardy Boys books that most people recognize as, oh, those blueback Hardy Boys books that I read as a kid, those aren't actually the original Hardy Boys books, because, and spoilers, I guess, for a later episode, the Hardy Boys were systematically rewritten in the 1950s. They were receiving complaints about the content of the books, and the boys' cavalier, and by that I mean very casual, and a Jack Sparrow, they're more guidelines as opposed to rules, approach to the law and law enforcement, but also the racial stereotypes that were present in the books. And I'm not defending any of the content in the books, but I do think it's important that we recognize that these books are historical artifacts, and they represent the way that society looked and acted and felt and thought at a particular time in history. So having a conversation about whether or not these books are still children's books based on the content that is in them, based on their historical status. There is a lot of value to be had by bringing those conversations into the modern day and casting, again, that critical eye on the world around us and the way that decisions are made in the world around us and the way that we can be involved in decisions that directly impact us and our children and our future and our past. And I know that sounds very incredibly existential. And my friends, I want us to remember that existentialism is not the goal of this podcast. We are here to take these conversations that traditionally happen behind closed doors at high levels, only in academia, and we're making them accessible and practical for the modern day. The question why is always going to be at the forefront of the minds of our wonderful podcast guest, of my mind, as we're looking at not only just having the conversation for the sake of the conversation, but also what we can take away from that, how what we learn in this podcast is going to impact the way that we think and act and we see the world around us. And that is really important. We're taking that innate curiosity and desire to know and desire to be a detective and to solve mysteries and to learn new things about the world around us. And we're putting that into practice in a way that is fun and engaging and exciting and makes us want to come back for more. I am really energized. I'm really excited. And I'm just so honored to have you along on this journey with me. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for giving Frank and Joe Hardy, and I guess me too, a place in your day. With all of that context and long-winded discussion and deadpan humor and everything else I've managed to, squeeze into this episode 0, I think it's about time that we dive right into it. So with that, my friends, my name is Kyra Droog. You're listening to Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast. And let's get out there and solve some mysteries together. Friends, thank you so much for joining me here today. It's been such fun chatting, and I can't wait to share even more energy, curiosity, and mystery in the coming episodes. Until next time, this is Kyra Droog, host of Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast, signing off. The absolutely stunning original theme music you've just enjoyed was composed by Jeff Lee. Sleuth Studies is grateful for the support of Volunteer Alberta, the Canadian Red Cross, the GloCal Foundation of Canada, and the Government of Canada. For more information about Sleuth Studies, the Hardy Boys podcast, please visit www.sleuthstudies.ca or find us on social media @Sleuth Studies.